The topic of the shir tonight is, why are we having so much fun on Lag BaOmer? The way that we're phrasing the question is to try and figure out the origins of the history of the Lag BaOmer celebration, which is really not documented in Shas. It's not documented by Chazal. There's no Ma'amare Chazal that talk about any aspect of celebration on Lag BaOmer. And so we are hard pressed. Anytime we don't find something that's documented in Chazal, then we have to start go sniffing and find out, is this an authentic religious practice, or did it crop up at some point having nothing to do with traditional Judaism? That's really the question. And this is a question that's plagued a lot of commentaries for a couple of centuries already. And so that's why we want to sort of be able to trace some of the issues that have been raised by great Rabbanim of a couple of centuries ago to try and explain what the significance of Lag BaOmer is. We know that as part and parcel of this question is the significance of the idea that this is known as the Hilulah de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that this is sort of the celebration. Some translate Hilulah as the wedding of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and we have to sort of understand wedding, meaning that on a spiritual sense is union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Some say that it was his Petira. So we have to try and understand how that plays a role, if at all, in the celebration. Well, we know it does because we know that there's a minhag today. If you were anywhere near Meron this time of year, you'd be making a pilgrimage to Meron, which is near Tzfat, and you'd be having a big celebration by the kever of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You'd see bonfires all over throughout Eretz Yisrael, and you would see parents taking their children who are around 2 or 3 years old to get haircuts around the kever of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So where does this all come from? It's not nowhere in Shas, nowhere in Chazal, nowhere in Midrash. So let's see where this comes from. As a matter of fact, the Sefer Taimin HaMinhagim is a very famous sefer that was written right around the turn of the 20th century by Rav Avraham Yitzchak Sperling. He writes that he was printing the Sefer Tamei Minhagim a second time. Apparently it was a very popular sefer in Europe, and so it was being republished. So with the republishing, you have an opportunity to include extra stuff in the second edition. So he writes, Im hofa'as ha-mahadura ha-chadasha ha-mitukenet va-ha-meuvedet shel ha-sefer Tamei HaMinhagim, with the republishing of the Sefer Tamei HaMinhagim, where I'm able to correct and add and fix all the mistakes. Nispakashti miyedidi harabani achasid kemoharar Yaakov Shol Weinfeld Shlita motzi laor mahadurazu. So the publisher, the person doing the actual printing of my work, whose name is Rabbi Weinfeld, he's asked me the following favor: lahalos b'sefer mikorei ta'amei minhagei hilula de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai b'yom Lag BaOmer. He asked me to include in this new edition of Tamei HaMinhagim a whole compendium of reasons as to why we call this day the Hilula de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the celebration of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and that which is done on Lag BaOmer. V'lama kavu yom kihila mirivavot alfei Yisrael b'kfar hakadosh Meron. And why is it that Jews gather on this day? Thousands and tens of thousands of Jews gather in the city of Meron on this day. V'chatzros u'v'nei kiddishtin kadishin hanivdim al tziyun kodesh hakadoshim. And they gather around the marker of the grave of the Holy of Holies, Man Pnei Ha'adon Hashem, Da Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the great and holy one, the divine one, right? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The Gaminyan Kaviyas Hasimcha B'Ma'ono B'Kolrino V'Yishua V'Yolei Tzadikim Taman. And what's the reason for this tremendous fervent celebration that's taking place on this day at Meron, V'chol Artzos Tevel, and including all other places in the world on Lag BaOmer, B'Yom HaKadisha Hadein, on this holy day? And notice the next line. I thought it was very clever. He says, Mi Osad Kol Eila? Who instituted all of this? V'chasheilas Chazal Mai Chanukah. And just like our sages ask in the Gemara and Shabbos, Mai Chanukah? Like, what's the significance, or why are we celebrating Chanukah? He says, Shu'alim halachu bo, which is alliteration. It's the foxes have entered into the temple, but it's also Sho'alim with an aleph. So many people are asking the question, my Lag BaOmer? What is the significance of Lag BaOmer? So therefore I've made it a point to delve into a whole bunch of holy works much of which is Kabbalistic in nature, because the Tamei Hagim had a Hasidish flavor to it, and there was a lot of very mystical material that is included in Tamei Hagim. So we're going to put aside the Tamei Hagim for just a minute, because he has pages and pages and pages of trying to explain what the significance of Lag BaOmer is, mostly based on Kabbalah. And Kabbalistic literature, as you know, is post-Talmudic. But we're going to try and trace it to other sources as well. So first of all, let's look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Tov Tzadi Gimel, it says just as far as what the significance of Lag BaOmer is before we get to Kabbalah. The Shulchan Aruch says, Noagin shaloli histaper ad Lag LaOmer. The minhag is not to get a haircut until Lag BaOmer. By the way, that for me is a reason to celebrate. I get to shave this growth on my face. That's a reason to celebrate for sure. Sha'omrim sha'az pasku milamus, because that's when we say that the students of Rabbi Akiva ceased dying from the plague, as you know the famous story. Now, let me ask you a question. Just think about it for a second. If that were the reason alone for the celebration on Lag BaOmer, do you think that that's a sufficient reason to really party it up on Lag BaOmer? Yay, we stopped dying. let's have a festivity.
Actually, it all died.
And furthermore, as David says, if they all died, then what's the point of having a celebration? Oh, good. No more students of Rabbi Akiva. Yay, no more death. Is that a reason to celebrate? It doesn't seem to be certainly not a sufficient reason. The Mechaber writes that his minhag, the minhag of the Sfardim, is not to get a haircut until the morning of the 34th, Elam Kain, etc., etc. But the Ramah says, "Uvemedinos elu einogin kedavar ve'elam mistarpim yom Lag BaOmer umar ben bog sasimcha." The minhag Ashkenaz, as the Ramah documents, is to get a haircut on the morning of Lag BaOmer. You don't have to wait till the 34th. You can do it on the 33rd itself. And he writes, Umar bimbo ketzat simcha. You add a little bit additional simcha. Vein omer bo tachanun, and you don't say tachanun on that day. So that would fit into the theme of they stop dying. Okay, at least we get some respite from the death. Okay, ketzat simcha. But to have bonfires and to have parties and barbecues and music and concerts and all this, right, come on, there's got to be a point where it seems to be completely inconsistent with the idea that this is the day when they stop dying. Now, one of the earliest citations of the connection between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Lag BaOmer, it's not in the Zohar, but one of the earliest connections between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Lag BaOmer is in the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, who was a Talmud of the Arizal, and he writes about it in his Sefer Pri Eitz Chaim, and this is in the 18th century. There are actually two editions, and I'm very grateful to Rabbi Eliezer Brat, who wrote an article last year in a blog called the Sfarim blog, which is very, very well documented. I encourage you to go check it out afterwards. And he cites these two editions of the Sefer Pri Eitz Chaim from Reb Chaim Vital. And in the first version, what we'll do is we'll read the more popular or the more readily available 1802 edition from Dubrovno. And we'll read that first, and then we'll read the earlier edition and see if there's any difference. But the story that appears in the Dubrovno is very relevant because it's cited by the Magen Avraham and the Ater Zekanim, who are, of course, commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. And there we see something that directly connects Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai to Lag BaOmer. So let's take a look at the story. We'll start the first line of the box on the right. He says, "Bizman hazeh b'inyan ha'olchim al kever Rashbi, the Rebbe Lazar beno b'Meiron." Rashbi, of course, is the acronym for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So what's the source of the custom for people who go on Lag BaOmer to visit the kever of Rashbi and his son Rabbi Eliezer in Meiron? Ani ra'isi l'morizal zeh shemoneh shanim shehalachi mishto v'im beiso v'haya sham gimel yamim hahem. I noticed that my Rebbe, the Ari, would go there for the last 8 years and would go to the kever of the Rashbi in Meiron, and he would stay there for 3 days. And one of his other Talmidim, I'm not sure who this is, told me that even before I knew the Ari, he would take his wife and kids and he would give them haircuts in Meron on Lag BaOmer. Gam He'li HaRabbi Eliezer HaLevi, Ki Hu Haya Noheg, this is the story. Rabbi Eliezer HaLevi testified to me that he personally used to have a custom Lomar Nachem B'Birkat Tishka, that he used to mourn the destruction of Jerusalem on a daily basis. And of course we know that there is such a concept that if a person feels the avelus of Yerushalayim, he's allowed to add additional supplications in the bracha of Yerushalayim Yerecha Berachamim Tashuv, the Tishkon B'Tocha, right? So he used to say the Nachem prayer every single day when he would say his Yerushalayim bracha. We only say it on Tisha B'Av, but he wanted to really express his feelings of sadness. And so when he was saying it on this day, and he was davening in Meron on Lag BaOmer, saying Nachem in his Shmona Esrei. Okay? So then something very fascinating happened. So Amar Morizal b'Shem Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai HaKavur Sham. So the Ari tells him, after he finishes his Shmona Esrei, that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai communicated to him, and he was now going to tell him exactly what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had said to him. That Sham Sha'omar Lo Emor Le'ish Hazeh Lama Hu Omer Nachem B'Yom Simchasi. He says, why are you saying Nachem, which is a mournful prayer, on the day of my rejoicing? How dare you say Nachem on a day of rejoicing, which is on Lag BaOmer? L'chein hu yihiyeh b'nechama bizman karov. And because you did something so terrible as to say mournful words on a day of my rejoicing, you will have to be consoled very shortly. Meaning telling him that something calamitous would happen to him. V'chein lo yatsa chodesh ad shemeis beno hagadol. It wasn't a month that went by and his eldest son passed away. V'kibel kos nechama alav. And as a result he had to accept consolation from others. So near mikol zeh, sheyeh shoresh liyitziyazu. It seems therefore, based on this story that was told me firsthand, that there's definitely basis for this custom of going to Meron on Lag BaOmer. Behatam shemeit Rashbi b'yom Lag BaOmer, ki hu mitalmidei Rabbi Akiva hanal shemesu b'sfiras ha'omer. And the reason is because this is the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died. He died on Lag BaOmer, and he was one of the students of Rabbi Akiva, who died during the time of Sfiras ha'omer. So
it's hard to believe Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the Talmidim, didn't give cover to other people because of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. How can you believe that he was reached at such a low level? It's hard to believe that.
Well, it's hard. I mean, Gerard, it's hard to believe that any of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, Rabbi Akiva, who preached Ve'afta l'recha kamocha, unless you want to argue that he only started preaching that after his 24,000 Talmidim were nifter, but it's hard to understand. Let's ask a more basic question. How can you tell me that he's one of the students that died of Rabbi Akiva that died during the Sfira, if the Gemara says explicitly that after the 24,000 Talmidim died, Rabbi Akiva established a small cadre of Talmidim, among them were Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, through whom the Mesorah of Rabbi Akiva was perpetuated. In other words, this directly contradicts the Gemara. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did not die with the 24,000 Talmidim. He was one of the new Talmidim that Rabbi Akiva set up to continue the Mesorah that was lost to those 24,000 Talmidim. Yeah? So that's...
Well, he could have still died on Lag BaOmer, but not that late.
Right. He could have died on another Lag BaOmer, but okay, but what does that have to do with the Misa of the students of Rabbi Akiva then? Okay, so good. And then of course we have to also ask the question, since when is it proper to celebrate the death of a tzaddik? How many of you have heard of Zayin Adar? What do we do on Zayin Adar? Is whose yahrzeit? Moshe Rabbeinu. What do we do on Zayin Adar?
Not say time.
Okay, Simi. But beyond not saying Tachanun, right? Isn't there a minhag to fast on a day that a tzaddik is nifter? Isn't there such a minhag? That's why, this completely goes opposite to the minhag of fasting on a yahrzeit. Do we fast on a yahrzeit or do we celebrate on a yahrzeit? So this also needs to be clarified and explained. What?
Many people fast.
That's right. Okay, so we're going to address that as well. Let's take a look at something else that's quite interesting. An earlier edition, which is not as readily available, is from 1785. This is when it was first printed. And you'll notice, we don't have time to go through all of the differences now. The text is much shorter in the 1785 edition. But you'll notice that it says on the bottom, so he just said, Lama hu omer nachem b'yom simchasi. So again, the channeled voice of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was critical of this Rabbi Eliezer Halevi, saying, why is he saying nachem on the day of my rejoicing? Ki gam Rashbi hayom talmidei Rabbi Akiva, v'hu somach b'Lag BaOmer. And he rejoiced on Lag BaOmer. So there is a big difference between shemes and samach. And so there have been many that have suggested that perhaps the edition from 1802, as you can see, this is chicken scratch to you and me. The printing presses were not that sophisticated, and so it's altogether possible that there was an error of transcription, and instead of samach, that he made a special simcha on Lag BaOmer, it's shemes, that he passed away on Lag BaOmer. Now take a look. There's a letter from the Lubavitcher Rebbe that also I found on Rabbi Braut's blog, and the Rebbe had sent a letter to Rav Zevin. Rav Zevin, who wrote the very famous Sefer Moadim B'Halacha, which was this amazing compendium. Rav Zevin, also from the Encyclopedia Talmud, is a huge Baki and Shas and Poskim and just a world-class Gaon in Talmud Chacham. He wrote this number of Sfar Moadim B'Halacha, where he tries to explain all of a number of different halachic issues revolving around the Moadim, the festivals of the calendar year. And so the Rebbe had sent a letter to Rav Zevin about his newly published Sefer, HaMoadim B'Halacha. And he says, Shalom ubracha, b'mikre ra'iti, b'sifrit kvod kedushas, esifro HaMoadim B'Halacha. I noticed your new Sefer, Moadim B'Halacha. And umatzasi sham beperak Lag BaOmer hatakas lashon hapriyetz chayim. And I notice you quote from the Dubrovno edition of the Rav Chaim Vital's Priyetz Chayim, and you write that Tam shemes Rashbi b'yom Lag BaOmer ki hu mitalmidei Rabbi Akiva shemesu b'sfiras ha'omer. And you write over there, quoting the Dubrovno edition, that Rashbi died on Lag BaOmer. V'hinei yadua asher keta ze muksha hu hein b'nigleh. He says, certainly from an overt standpoint, not using any Sisrei Torah, not using any mystical stuff, he says this paragraph is quite difficult to reconcile. Ki Rashbi hu mehachamisha talbinim shesamach Rabbi Akiva achar kach. He says, Rabbi Rashbi didn't die with the 24,000 Talmidim. He was one of the 5 students that Rabbi Akiva gave smicha after the deaths of the 24,000 Talmidim. And furthermore, he says, "Hey mitzad anister al pi hamavur," that, and then he says, based on Sisrei Torah as well, that Rashbi could not be this person. He says, we won't go through that part of the paragraph. He says, "Ve'emes kain hu asher bepriyetz chaim defus karetz lo nimsa ketahanal." He says, and if you look at an earlier edition, or perhaps a later edition as well, I'm not sure when the Karetz edition came out, you will not find that line. V'chein b'sidurei harizal. And he says, if you look at the Siddur of the Rizal and other texts, he says, you will not find that text. And he says, V'zeh lashon sefer, next paragraph. V'zeh lashon sefer hakavonos b'tami minhagi Lag BaOmer, ki harashbi alav hashalmu michamisha talmida of hagdolim shel Rabbi Akiva, he says, if you say that Rabbi Akiva made simcha on the day of Lag BaOmer because that's when the students of Rabbi Akiva ceased to die, and he was one of the students, the 5 students that remained after their deaths, this would explain why Rashbi made some level of simcha on Lag BaOmer, and that seems to be the correct girsa. And therefore, in the concluding paragraph of the letter, the Lubavitcher Rebbe implores Rav Zevin to fix the error that he made in the Sefer Moadim B'Halacha in the next edition, and to notify people that is a misnomer. Okay, Let us go on. Let's take a look at the famous Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer from the early 19th century writes a tshuva about the practice of going to Meron on Lag BaOmer and having a big celebration. And we'll just do a portion of this tshuva. It's in Chelek Beis, Yoredeya, Siman Reish Lamed Gimel, and he writes, the paragraph starts with Amnam Yadati Ki Shamati Sha'achshav Achsher Dori Umemerchak Yavo. I've heard this new custom of a group of righteous Jews who come from far and wide. Yidroshu es Hashem Be'ir HaKodesh Tzfas B'yom Lag BaOmer B'hilula Derashbi Zal. I hear that this is newfangled custom, that people come from all over to Tzfas, which is near Meron, and they go and they make a big celebration. They call it the Hilula of Rashbi. V'im ki kol kavanasam l'shem shamayim scharim rav b'li safek. I have no doubt that their reward is very great. Why? Because al derech v'digulo udeliku neros alai ahava, kamo shekasav Tosfos reish perik ein ma'amidim. Tosfos over there says that any time Jewish people gather together in order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then they get rewarded. There's no question. The very fact that people come together for an asifa or a kenisa or whatever, for a kinos, whatever they get together for, if Jews are coming together for the ostensible purpose of serving Hashem in some way, then they are rewarded. Even if the reason why they're getting together is in error. However, he says, Avol mitam zeba atzmo, Hayisi ani min haprushim keben durotoi shelo etzarech lios Yosef sham umeshane min hagam bifnehem. However, I want you to know, I myself did not go to Meron. I did not feel it was appropriate for me to participate in the celebration. I didn't want to go there and sit and do nothing and demonstrate openly that I did not endorse their custom. V'shelo erza lihischaber imahim bazeh. I didn't want to join together with them. Ki kavar kama kirkurim kirker b'pri chadash v'kuntras minhagei isur shelo al mekomos sha'osim yom tov b'yom shenaseh lo hamnes. He says the pri chadash goes to a lot of effort in order to try to defend the practice of people who make a celebration on a day when a miracle happens to a community. Now this is a very old custom. It is a custom that is endorsed by the Mishnah, that if a person has a miracle happen to him on a certain date, he should try to commemorate it on an annual basis. And entire communities did this. If an entire community was privy to some kind of great Yeshua, then there would be a minhag that in that town, or that city, they would make some kind of celebration. We have the whole Sefer Megillas Tainis, which was a scroll where on certain days you're not allowed to fast, because on certain days during the Second Temple period, wonderful, wondrous, miraculous things happened to the Jewish people on certain days. However, he says that it's problematic to do those kinds of things today, because Mehad Yamrinan Parakamada Rosh Hashanah Kamaisa Batil or Achanaisa Mosifin Bitmiya. He says because the Gemara itself challenges the practice of newer generations innovating their own holidays. He says if the older holidays are no longer extant, those holidays that we used to celebrate during the Second Temple era, we no longer celebrate. What right do we have to innovate new ones on our own? And we skip the brackets. Uminhag Mitzrayim B'Yom Chav Gimel Adar. He says, for example, there's a custom for the Jews in Egypt that they make a celebration on the 23rd of Adar, because they say that not only were we liberated, but we actually were privy to being saved. Apparently there was some pogrom that they were saved from. Avol, he says, the last three lines, Avol ikvamo eid shelo nasa bones v'lo huskar b'shasu poskim b'shum makom v'remez u'remiza. He says, but it's one thing to say that a community can innovate a celebration on a day when a miracle happened to them and they were saved from a calamity. However, just to innovate a celebration on a day where no miracle occurred, and all that happened is that the tragedy stopped, right? And there's no allusion to it whatsoever in any halachic authority, in any Talmudic authority whatsoever. Rakminias hespe v'tamis minhagahu. The time of Gufalo Yadana, I have no idea what the reason for this minhag is. The Chassam Sofer says. So we're in good company. If the Chassam Sofer says, I don't know why they do this, then you clearly see that this is not something that's embedded in bedrock of religious practice. Okay?
When did he write this?
This is early 19th century. Chassam Sofer is the Gadol Hador in the early 19th century, and he's the rabbi of Pressburg, but he's known far and wide. He's considered the Gadol Hador at the time. So he says that Uvesider Mahariyavatz, the Siddur of the Ivets, which we quoted even last time we had a shir, he writes that Al Pinistar Dahava Kebestin Shekulo Chayev Havazakai Dahainu Hod Shebahod Yehuyan Sham. The Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes something very interesting. The night of Lag BaOmer in the Sphira is known as Hod Shebahod, which apparently is the lowest level of all of the mystical spheros that we are commemorating. So sometimes when you get to the lowest level, that sort of reverses into something that becomes very holy. It's a Kabbalistic kind of principle that sometimes you have to go down to the depths in order to be able to become completely purged. And therefore, since Hod Shebahod is the lowest of the levels, right, so then that's the time to really celebrate, because it represents a period of complete emergence from the lowest level. Okay? But he writes, he says, but nevertheless, he goes through a whole Kabbalistic polemic against what Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes, and we're going to skip over all of that because it's I don't understand it, but I have it there printed for you in the smaller print. You're welcome to take a look. And we continue, he says, Ulefi de'isa b'midrash shemiyomshe kala hacharora shehotziu mimitzrayim holchu gimel yomim below lechem. So the Chassam Sofer says, perhaps we could suggest this following. The following is perhaps a reason why we celebrate on Lag BaOmer. He says, the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, they took provisions with them. How long did the provisions last when they left Egypt? They lasted a month. And then after their provisions ran out, it said the Torah writes, Holchu gimel yomim below lechem. They wandered for 3 days without bread. V'achar kach yorad haman. And then the man began to fall. Now, he says, Im kein haya horadas haman biyom lag BaOmer. Then it would turn out, using this calculation, that the man began falling on Lag BaOmer. Then that would be a good reason why we would have a celebration on Lag BaOmer to commemorate the falling of the manna for the Jews in Egypt. Maybe that's the reason. Great, sounds great, right? There's only one small problem. He says, Ach hu neged hashas, right? Perak Rabbi Akiva. He says it's contradicted by what the Gemara says explicitly, that the man began falling on the 15th of Iyar, not on the 18th of Iyar, not on Lag BaOmer. So it's a little bit problematic, he says. But he says, Mikol makom la'asosa yom simcha v'hadlako b'makom yadua dafka sheyatel talpiyosha kol niftim l'sham lo yadati im rishoyim la'asos kein. He says, but at the end of the day, no matter what kind of reason we're going to find, to innovate a new day of celebration, yes, and to make bonfires, and to gather at some specific place. What do they do out in Arizona? What is that called? The Burning Man Festival, it's like to get together to create this whole new, for him in the 19th century, it was like the Burning Man Festival. It's like this new innovation, right? To get together at one place in Eretz Yisrael and to create all of these amazing, these newfangled things. I don't even know if there's a heter to do it. I don't know if it's even permitted. He's making a citation to something which we're going to skip over. It would seem to me that there's a connection here to something that the Ramban writes in one of his amazing epistles. The Ramban writes something truly frightening. He says, when you think about it, he says, any place that had greater sanctity in Eretz Yisrael turned out to be more destroyed at a time of Churban. The greater the sanctification of a place, and of course the Temple Mount is the greatest example of the most sanctified place, the more sanctity the place has, the more destruction until Mashiach comes that must remain in that place. Al kein hol of avonosenu harabim. So therefore, we're still living in a time when the time has not yet come for the third temple to be built. It would therefore seem that now's not the time for Jerusalem to be populated with great strength. Ki lo zachinu lekach, because we haven't yet merited it. Mi'itein v'yizakeni Hashem yisbarach lios mimeshivim shel Yerushalayim. I wish that Hashem would make me one of those people who has the opportunity to be one of the first settlers of Yerushalayim when it comes time to rebuild it. Ve'al kol panim lo me'maharsim u'me'macharivim chas v'shalom laharich golos Yisrael. But I certainly don't want to be one of those people who contributes to the future, to the continued destruction and decimation of the Jewish people. So this is truly remarkable. What the Chassam Sofer is, I believe he is suggesting, is that to create a celebration, especially in Eretz Yisrael, at a time when we are experiencing Galus, only succeeds in prolonging the Galus, which is really quite a dramatic statement when you think about it. He says, Halavai, I should be Zocha to help rebuild Yerushalayim. It almost sounds like, I hate to say it, maybe we should turn off the camera, it almost sounds like he's like a member of the Neturei Karta. He says, I don't want to help contribute to the destruction of, or the continued exile of the Jewish people by prematurely coming to celebrate something in Eretz Yisrael when it's not the proper time and it's not the proper place. So therefore, I have to remove myself from this kind of celebration on Lag BaOmer and Meron, because it may be doing more damage than doing good. Okay. Let us go on. In the middle 19th century, we have a rabbi named Rav Aryeh Balchuver, who writes a sefer called Shem Aryeh. It's a Shilas and Tshuva sefer. I have to confess, to the best of my recollection, unless I went sometime in yeshiva years and years ago and learned from this sefer, I think this is the only tshuva that I've ever studied from the Shem Aryeh, where he's got a famous tshuva about Lag BaOmer. And it's a long tshuva, so that's why I give you sort of a synopsis in English on the bottom of page 2, but I still feel it's important for us to read some select paragraphs from the Shem Aryeh. Because as you'll see, he's also quite disturbed by this practice, because it's not only has the practice of celebrating on Lag BaOmer in and of itself does he not know what the source is, but it's contributed to other practices that have begun to sort of unravel as a result of this celebration of Lag BaOmer. So let's see what he's talking about. It's in Siman Yud Daled of the Shem Aryeh, and the name of the tshuva is, I'm the one who added those in Paintbrush. I did that. I added numbers to the paragraphs to help you find your bearings. He says, it's on page 3. Bayomim hahemu bizman hazeh heichelu b'nei amenu b'mixas machuzos kemo Volin, Padalia, Ukraina va'od lishloach yadam b'minhagim shenagu b'hem avosenu va'avos avosenu me'olam levatelosam. He says it's a very sad state of affairs that we live in the world that we live in today, in the middle of the 19th century, when many Jews today have taken it upon themselves to shirk customs that our ancestors have always embraced. And they, for whatever reason, they find a reason to say this custom is no longer applicable to us. V'yadua, asher kol haminhagim lo lechinam nityasedu. We learned this 2 weeks ago when we talked about Minhag Yisrael Torah. When we talked about, when I was talking to the ladies, I talked about Shlisel Chala. It's the same concept. In other words, everything is holy. That if it's a minhag of the Jewish people, it's holy, and therefore any minhag that the Jewish people practice is not for naught. V'yesh lahem shorish v'ikar b'divrei Torah. L'chein kosva poskim b'kama mekomos she'ein levatel shum minhag ki minhag Yisrael Torah. Who therefore it's really forbidden to try and abolish any minhag, because minhag Yisrael is Torah, which is ironic because he's going to challenge the minhag of celebrating on Lag BaOmer. Because you have to realize, in the 19th century, it's a relatively new minhag. You understand? It's not something which is miyamim yamima, right? It's something that is relatively new. The Ayin B'Ramah, he goes through and he says, and he quotes. Well, let's go to paragraph 2. He says, "V'ayin b'prichadus simin tov tzadivav b'dinei minhagei iser." Mashakasav bazeh b'inyanim elu. Ve'ata basi l'daber al mashakasav harama b'yordei sif simin tov beis b'shem harbe poskim kadmonim. What I'd like to address now, he says, however, is that which the Ramah writes in Yoredeya, in Siman Tov Beis, where he quotes many poskim who say, Shemitzvah lihis anos yom shemes bo ava v'imo, that it's a mitzvah to fast on the day of the yahrzeit of a parent. And this is in Hilchas Avelus, right, in Yoredeya. And v'ayin sham kama chilukei dinim bazeh, v'ayin Baruch Chaim simin tavkuf samaches harbe dinim bazeh. It's also, there's a similar sif in Orach Chaim as well that talks about the minhag to fast on the yahrzeit of a parent.
It's not known, does it? We should say not too many people do it.
I don't know. You got to take a poll. I'm not so sure. I'm not convinced of that. I'm not convinced. Umishanim kadmoniyos nogu kein kol medinoseinu v'huminag vasikin shenisyased mikadmonim ve'en adam rashai levatlo imlo al pi ones. He says this is a minhag vasikin, and it's not something that a person should readily give up unless there's an emergency and he doesn't have any other choice. And so what's his problem? He says in paragraph 3, he says ve'ata chadashim mikarov bo shemikilim b'tanizeh ve'ena misanim klal. He says there's a newfangled practice that a lot of Jews are not fasting at all on the day of the yahrzeit. V'hu be'einehem kimitzachek. They think it's a whole. They think the whole thing is a joke. Umal'igim al misha misana b'yamim elu b'la'ag harbe. And they make fun and they scoff at people who have an extensive yahrzeit practice. V'yu mal'ivim b'minhagei Yisrael hakdoshim v'asum izet tzchok v'hitul. And they cast aspersions and they make it into, they ridicule it. Aval od ra'a mizos ra'isi be'enai b'kama mekomos. But that's not bad enough. He says it gets even worse. Asher yahapchu evlam l'sason v'yomisa savim yasu mishta v'simcha. People say, come over for a l'chaim. I have a yahrzeit today. We'll have a big celebration. You're right, and they make like a shtickle party, right, on the day of the yahrzeit. He says, where does this come from? He says, "Beprat misha hayalo av kasher v'yashar chasid v'tzadik yismechu v'yirananu b'yom misasam v'yasu mishtek gadol l'chol b'nei ha'ir l'chavod nishmas hatzadik ha'kavur sham." And they'll go say, I'm making a tikkun today. I mean, a tikkun I don't think he's referring to. I think he's referring to more like a party, which I don't think is what we would refer to a kavod or a tikkun. That's not what, I don't think he's talking about that. He's more talking about he invites all the people of the town. He says, we're making a party in honor, in memory of my beloved father. So the fast day has been converted into a day of partying. And they say, God forbid, you should not fast on the day of the death of a tzaddik. You should celebrate on the day of the death of a tzaddik. And what's their raya? V'rayosam imashim arbim b'simcha b'lag ba'omer al kever ha-tzaddik b'tzina kadisha Rabbi. And he says they prove it from the fact that there's a big celebration in Meron on Lag BaOmer, on the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter. Ki yadua shemit'asfim shama mikol ha'aratzot madlikim sham hadlakot ma'orot rabot b'sasimu smechim b'makom menuchato b'kfar Meron hasamuch b'tzvat. And we all know what goes on. They make bonfires, and they have big celebrations, and there's dancing and there's singing, and that's the yahrzeit of Rabbi. So you see that on a yahrzeit of a great tzaddik, you're supposed to celebrate. Va'omrim v'atar rashbin anan gararina v'imenu anu lomdim lasos kem latzadikim ha'ila hakdoshim asher ba'aretz. And he says, and this is what they base their celebration of their parent. They say, if it's good enough for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it's good enough for my father or my mother. If they can make bonfires and celebrations for Rabbi, why can't we do it for my father who was a tzaddik also? So that's the basis of why people are doing this, and the Shem Aryeh is very upset with this. He feels that this is really a sort of a complete distortion of the proper minhag, which is to fast on the day of the yahrzeit. So let's go on and on and on. We're going to go to paragraph number 4, and he says, "V'hinei." I just wanted to point out that he cites the story that we learned about in the Reb Chaim Vital. He talks about the story about Rabbi Elazar Halevi, who was visited in a dream and told that he was going to be punished for saying Nachem. He says that's not a riot. It's one thing to be sad, to have extra mourning on the day of the death of a tzaddik like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because he says it was the day of my rejoicing. But what right do you have to actually make a big party? That's not what you can draw from that story. You can't draw from that story that you can make a big party. All you can draw from that story is that it's not appropriate to say Nachem on that day. So that's what he wants to argue in the end of paragraph 3. But let's go on. And he says in paragraph number 4, V'hinei kol yamai tamati al zeh. Simcha zu mazo osa. And my whole life I couldn't figure it out. I didn't understand what is the purpose of this simcha. See, today we would say any time you can get Jews to be happy over Judaism, that's the reason to celebrate, you know. If we could get a bunch of Jews to gather together to dance for someone's yahrzeit, even if the minhag is to fast, I would tell you that we're way ahead of the game, because we live in a time when it's hard enough to get Jews to do anything that has anything to do with Torah and Yiddishkeit. But he's living in a different era. He's living in a time where he feels that it's necessary to preserve a Masorah. And if something is newfangled and has no origin and legitimacy, then we can't endorse it. He says, "Va'adarabba halom atzinu kiroi lihisanos b'yom misas tzadikim." He says the right thing to do is to fast when tzadikim die. And he quotes from the Torah, Or Chaim Siman Tav Kuf Pei B'Shem Bahag Elu Hayomim Shemis'anu B'Hem Min HaTorah. He goes through a whole list, which is codified in Shulchan Aruch, of days where people are supposed to fast. And a number of days that are listed that we fast, or that some people have a minute to fast, as on the day when Moshe Rabbeinu died, on the day when Aaron died, on the day when Miriam died. Some people say that one of the reasons for the fast that's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, that on the 8th and the 9th and the 10th of Teves there are fast days. And some say that the reason why to fast on the 9th of Teves, which we don't do anymore, but it's the day of the yahrzeit of Ezra, HaSofer, who brought the Jews back from the Gola to build the second temple. But the point is that, and the Mishnah Berurah writes this, but the point is that you see that the minhag is to fast, not to have a party. And therefore he says, and what are you going to tell me? Because you know that they call it the Hilula of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Is that the reason? No. What does the word Hilula mean? The word Hilula doesn't mean a party. He says, you know what Hilula means? He says Hilula means Halel Vashevach, Liyikara Deshachvi Lahaspido L'Shavcha. I'm just skipping towards the end of paragraph 4. He says the word Hilula doesn't mean a party, doesn't mean a celebration. The word Hilula comes from the word Halel. You have to say words of praise in the eulogy of a tzaddik, but not to have a party. You gather together in a very sober setting with sobriety and solemnity, and people gather and they talk about the great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Torah that he brought down to this world, and so forth and so on. That's what a Hilula is supposed to be, not bonfires and singing and dancing. Okay, so this is his problem. Let's go on to paragraph number 5. He says the fact of the matter is that the idea of gathering by a tzaddik's kever on the day of the yahrzeit is an ancient minhag, and it's brought down in the words of Chazal. And as a matter of fact, if you look in Sefer Tamei HaMinhagim, which I'm sure many of you have in your homes already, you'll notice that in that section for the Hilula, the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that Sefer Tamei HaMinhagim brings down all of these ancient customs to visit the kever of a tzaddik on the day of his yahrzeit. He says, I have no problem with that. He says that Talmidei Chachamim always gathered at the kever of their Rebbe on the day of the yahrzeit. He says, Uve'emes, the bottom line, who got li kigam al kever harashbi. Turn the page. Now we're on page 4. Oskim kol hayom v'kol halayla v'sefer hazohar. He says there are holy Yiddelach on Lag BA that instead of making bonfires and celebrating, they stay for 24 hours by the kever of the Rashbi studying the Zohar, because Rashbi is the author of the Zohar. So I can appreciate that. I think that's a very appropriate thing to do. And umashim adlikin umeirim b'ma'oros gedolos hakol hu lichvodim. If they light candles and they light torches in order to show him honor, that's appropriate as well. Chazal, by the way, say one of the reasons why that is given for lighting bonfires on Lag BA is because the Gemara says that after Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was nifter, there was a big fire that appeared over his kever. So the bonfires that we light is representative of the light that appeared, the fire that appeared over the kever of Shimon Bar Yochai, which represents the light of enlightenment that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai succeeded in bringing down to the world through his teachings of the Zohar. Because he was Megala, that which was Nistar, to the world, that which was hidden to the world up until then. He succeeded in exposing, revealing all of the Sisrei Torah to his Talmidim, and it was because of him that the world of Sisrei Torah was accessible to a larger population of the Jewish people. So he says, okay, I'll buy that. He says, "Aval simcha gedola she'osim sham lo yadana taima." He says, the simcha that they make, I don't understand. And if anything, there should be more of a mournful environment at the time of his yahrzeit. He says, you want to say that it's the day of celebration for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai because he was one of the students of Rabbi Akiva, and he succeeded in perpetuating the Masorah of Rabbi Akiva when all of the other students died, and that's the day that they stopped dying. He says, "Ve'ein hadover toli klal bazeh mashu yom misaso ve'ein hasimcha bazel misas rashbi b'yom lag ba'omer." He says, but if that's the case, that then it's got nothing to do with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's death. Of course, he's using the Girsa of Reb Chaim Vital that we saw from Dubrovno, where he thinks that it's a reason to celebrate on the day of the yahrzeit. And remember, the Shem Aryeh's whole problem is, why are we commemorating a yahrzeit with celebration? It's one thing to tell me that it's a yontif for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai because he feels he was able to save the Torah from being lost by being one of the students who perpetuates the Masorah, and he does that specifically on a day when the students of Rabbi Akiva stop dying, because he represents the cessation of death of the students of Rabbi Akiva, because he's able to perpetuate the teachings of Rabbi Akiva. But he says, but what does that have to do with the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? And that's where people make a mistake. Now remember, if he's decrying making a yahrzeit into a day of celebration based upon this minhag of celebrating on Rashbi's yahrzeit, then you can certainly appreciate the Lubavitcher Rebbe's letter to Rav Zevin saying it's really inappropriate to perpetuate this idea that's based on a printing error that we celebrate on the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. We're not celebrating on the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. We're celebrating on the Yom Simchaso of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay, let's go on to paragraph 6. He says that the whole reason, B'nei Gufa Davar, שנהגו בל"ג בעומר שלא לומר תחינה ומרבים קצת שמחה מטעם שפסקו תלמידי רבי עקיבא למוס. He says that whole reason, that the reason why we don't say tachanu on Lag BaOmer, and we have a little bit of simcha like the Ramah had said, is because the students of Rabbi Akiva ceased to pass away. He says that the Gemara says that they all died between Pesach and Shavuos. So the question, of course, is, so what's the reason to celebrate just because they finished dying on Lag BaOmer? In other words, the problem that the Shem Aryeh has is, I think, who was it that asked the question? If they all died, if all the students of Rabbi Akiva, if all 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died, and then the last one died on Lag BaOmer, and that's when they stopped dying, why is that a reason to celebrate? He says, it doesn't seem to make any sense. Why Bichlal, even if it has to do with the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, why should there be any kind of celebration at all, even a Ksas Simcha? And if you take a look in paragraph 7, but before we get to paragraph 7, he says, one reason that a person could argue that there's a reason to celebrate is based upon a Gemara that talks about the celebration of Tu B'Av. Anyone know what Tu B'Av is? Why do we celebrate Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av?
People stop dying.
Because people stopped dying in the Midbar. People stopped dying in the Midbar, so they started to, the last generation of Jews stopped dying. In the 39th year, they were traveling in the desert. The last group, the last kavutza of Jews stopped, that was the end of the deaths, of the end of the punishment of the Chet HaMeraglim. They knew that took place on Tu B'Av. So he says, but maybe you'll argue that that's the reason, just like over there by Tu B'Av we have a celebration, so too when the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva all finished dying, we should have a Ksas Simcha. He says, but that's a misnomer as well. He says the reason why we have a celebration on Tu B'Av is not just because the Jews stopped dying, but because Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah came back after the Chet HaMeraglim was completely atoned for. In other words, what Chazal mean that on Tu B'Av we have a celebration because they stopped dying was because as a result Ruach HaKodesh came back to Moshe Rabbeinu. But that doesn't apply over here. If anything, the great degree of Mesorah was lost as a result of the deaths of the students of Rabbi Akiva. So how can you say that something positive emerged from the deaths of the students of Rabbi Akiva? So he says, I really don't even understand why even K'tzas Simcha we should have on Lag BaOmer. It doesn't seem to make any sense. What's the point? So in paragraph 7, he answers that question, and he says, V'hanirali b'yishuv davar zeh. What I'd like to explain is, the Hadamrinan b'shas shekula mesu b'perak echad, that when the Gemara says they all died in one period of time from Pesach until Shavuos, he says it doesn't mean that they all 24,000 died in 1 year from Pesach to Shavuos. Rather, what it means that on an annual basis, just like during the times of the Meisei Hamidbar, just like in the times of the desert, it's not that all the Jews who left Egypt died in 1 year. They died over a span of 39 years. And basically the same thing is true about the students of Rebbe Akiva. They didn't all die, not all 24,000 students died in 1 year. What happened was you would have 2,000 die in year 1, another 5,000 would die in year 2, etc., etc., etc. And what they noticed was that every year all the students died during the period between Pesach and Lag BaOmer, and on Lag BaOmer the deaths tapered off. So he says, I could understand that that's a reason to make a K'tzas Simcha on Lag BaOmer, because if you're not celebrating that all the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva are now dead, you're celebrating that over the course of several years, when the students of Rabbi Akiva died, they stopped dying, so all the remaining students could feel a sense of reassurance, I have 1 more year to live. So that was the reason for having a shtickle simcha on Lag BaOmer. That at least explains the minhag of the Shulchan Aruch as to why we have even a little bit of simcha on Lag BaOmer.
But if that's the case, why wouldn't they have learned from their mistakes after year 1 and then corrected their behavior?
That's a good question, Alan. Maybe we don't know. Maybe they tried, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they just couldn't absorb the teaching. Maybe they didn't understand why they were dying. We don't know. And we don't know how many years he's just presenting this as a theory.
And that principle puts Rashbi into this group now.
It would put. It could potentially. You're saying it could potentially no, but the Gemara says it still contravenes the Gemara. The Gemara says that after the 24,000 died, Rabbi Akiva set up five new Talmidim, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was among the 5 new ones. So I don't think that would explain it.
It fits in with the Tu B'Av reason as well, because they didn't actually stop dying on Tu B'Av. They recognized that they stopped dying, exactly. They stopped dying, and it was up to Tu B'Av.
Right.
They kept on going back to the graves. It was only
exactly
that they recognized that the dying had stopped.
Right. So, if you we'll skip paragraph 8 because he just really is quoting the Chassam Sofer, and he wants to demonstrate that the Chassam Sofer rails against this minhag of gathering in Meron on Lag BaOmer, and he says, V'hinei Yadua, paragraph 9. He says, it's well known, Ma'di'isa b'Masechah Shabbos Daf Lamed Gimel, Shenigzar mehamalchus al Rashbi sheyeh hareg. We know the very famous story. By the way, we learned this. Those of you who came to the Pirkei Avos year, I quoted this Gemara from Shabbos Daf Lamed Gimel. The very famous story that the Roman government had decreed that he should be executed for teaching Torah, and he had to hide in a cave for 13 years. And finally, the decree was rescinded, and what happened? Adamis Kesar Batla Hakazera Ain Shama Mishnah Hamaisa Barichus. And then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says something which I didn't quote to you on Shabbos. He says, Hol v'israchesh nisa ezel ve'askein milsa dichsiv vayavo Yaakov shalem ayin sham. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is quoted in the Gemara is saying, is that once a person is privy to a miracle, which means I was supposed to be executed, and they didn't. For some reason a miracle happened, I was able to survive in a cave and avoid the execution of the Romans. I have an obligation to give some form of shevach, some form of praise to Hashem, to signify that I acknowledge that Hashem is responsible for my Yeshua, for my salvation. And as a result, it is the Shem Aryeh's theory that one of the things that the Rashbi did to show his appreciation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to make some kind of Sudas Hoda'ah on the fact that he wasn't killed by the Romans. And we commemorate the Sudas Hoda'ah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai by commemorating his yard site, which is what? The day he succeeded in dying a natural death instead of a death through horrible execution prematurely by the Romans. So it turns out that it is appropriate to celebrate the yard site of a great tzaddik if the yard site is a commemoration of something wonderful, that he died in his bed instead of being hung or tortured horribly like Rabbi Akiva was. Lahavdil, Rabbi Akiva died a horrible death, never. He was tortured by the Romans until he died. So the fact that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did not die like Rabbi Akiva, and he succeeded in dying in his deathbed like a normal man in a ripe old age, that's the reason to celebrate the yard site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's his theory.
It's coincidental of what happened being on the same day as B-Omer that Rabbi Akiva stopped dying.
And it seems to be just a coincidence. He says it seems to be just a coincidence. But he says at the bottom of paragraph 9, he says Uvacharu lazeh yom hamisa lezikaron hanei shemes misas atzma v'lo bidei adam. They chose this day. Maybe it's not such a coincidence. Maybe they chose this day because it's also the day that they stopped dying a misa mishuna, a different death, an abnormal death. In other words, maybe Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai really didn't die in Lag BaOmer. We don't know. It's not clear from his language. Either he died on that day, or even if he didn't die in Lag BaOmer, they chose Lag BaOmer as the day to signify that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died a normal death and didn't die an abnormal death. Okay? So I just want to leave you with one last idea. The last idea that I want to leave you with, and you have the whole tshuva from the Shemari if you want to go through it on your own. But I also copied for you Reb Tzadok Milublin, the free tzaddik, to give you some idea. Now, by Hasidim, Lag BaOmer is a big deal. And I don't wish, we have this very famous principle that someone who's not a Kabbalist should never cast aspersions on minhagim that are based on Kabbalah. Right? Because as they say, as a friend once told me, never make fun of someone who can turn you into a frog. Right? In other words, if you don't know what you're talking about, don't be so quick to cast aspersions. We don't, Ein Lanu Esek B'Nistarot, we don't understand a lot of the Sisrei Torah that perhaps Lag BaOmer is based upon, but we're just presenting to you that in the 19th century, which is relatively recent, a lot of great Rosh Yeshiva and Rabbanim were scratching their heads and saying, I don't get it, I don't know where this comes from. But it has become more popular over the years, and certainly it's not just in the recent past, it goes back to the 19th century, and there's certainly basis for it to visit the kever of a tzaddik. And what's more is that we have to appreciate that al pi Sisrei Torah, there may be something quite significant to this. So the Reb Tzadok Milublin gives us this last idea. You can look at it inside, but I just want to point out one thing. That according to Reb Tzadok, when we celebrate the yard site, or the day of Simcha, whichever way you learn the Girsa of Reb Chaim Vital, when we celebrate by the kever of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, what we're really celebrating is Rabbi Akiva. We're really celebrating Rabbi Akiva because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai represents the ultimate student-Rebbe relationship. As far as of all the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara says that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the truma of the truma of Rabbi Akiva. He was the ultimate extract of Rabbi Akiva's Torah. And what is Rabbi Akiva? What does Rabbi Akiva represent? Rabbi Akiva represents Torah Sheba'al Peh. What makes Torah Sheba'al Peh different from Torah Shebichtav? So Reb Tzadok says, when it comes to Torah Shebichtav, it's appropriate to mourn the death of a tzaddik. Because when it comes to Torah Sheba'al Peh, when it comes to a Mesorah that you want to gain from someone who is a living wellspring of Torah, you're completely reliant on that person's Torah. But the problem is that when they're alive, you say to yourself, okay, so what do I need to push myself? If I have a shayla, I'll go ask the Rebbe. It's only after the Rebbe is dead that you begin to say to yourself, all of the Torah that I learned from him now becomes that much more vital and more, and so much more a part of me, because I don't have anyone that I can go to ask anymore. And therefore I need to hold on to it for dear life. Do you understand the mentality that Rav Tzadok is describing is that the Talmud who receives Torah Sheba'al Peh from his Rebbe only has the proper appreciation for that Torah once the tzaddik has passed from this world. So Rabbi Akiva, who represents Torah Sheba'al Peh, what we commemorate with the death of both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the fact that Torah study of Torah Sheba'al Peh became even stronger with the deaths of these two great tzaddikim who perpetuated Torah Sheba'al Peh, because of the fact that with their demise, we had to take it upon our shoulders to perpetuate Torah Sheba'al Peh in their absence. And the only reason why we don't commemorate this, it's not called the Hilula de Rabbi Akiva, is because Rabbi Akiva died a horrible death, and that's not something that we can celebrate. But we can celebrate the death of Rashbi because he represents the truma of Rabbi Akiva, represents the extract of Rabbi Akiva, and he died a peaceful, normal death, free from persecution. And that's really what Lag BaOmer represents. And therefore Reb Tzadok concludes and he says, and just let's read the last 4 lines and with this we'll conclude. He says, V'lochein b'yom zeh Yirdeh nefesh zeh shahoya. One second. I'm sorry, the last 2 lines, excuse me. Uv'chol shana כשבא יום זה יכול כל אדם לזכות לפי כוחו להשיג קביעת דברי תורה שירד ביום זה בתורה שבעל פה ולכן קבעוהו למועד. Every single year during this Yortzeit period, it becomes a day where there's a new power that emerges within Klal Yisrael to be able to strengthen their ability to ensconce the Torah Sheba'al Peh that they have obtained from the great rabbis of yesteryear. This is this power that emerges on Lag BaOmer, and that's why they made it into a celebration. It's a celebration because Torah Sheba'al Peh is strengthened on Lag BaOmer. So if that's our attitude when we're celebrating on Lag BaOmer, and as we're having our bonfires and roasting our marshmallows and singing and dancing, halavai, that we should have this in mind, that this is the time for the strengthening of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and we should all be zochet to have that strengthening as we get closer to Kabbalah Satorah. Have a good night.